Shabbat Shalom! Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Almond House Fellowship. And this week we are in Torah portion Vayechi. And on the screen you can see from the Hebrew that means "and he lived." And this is the final portion now in the book of Genesis. And it's been a privilege really to let the gents do the book of Genesis. I've had the honour of doing the bookend. I got a chance to do Bereshit, and then now I'm doing Vayechi. So there's a lot going on here in this Torah portion. And I've really been praying this week about what I could share. I only had a limited time to put this together, so I was like, look, Father, you will tell me in the hour what to say. So I hope that this teaching blesses you online, and I hope that it can be relevant to your life. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap of where we're up to in the narrative. So last week we had the grand reveal to Jacob and his sons that Joseph was the second command in Egypt. He took his Pharaoh's garments off, or the Egyptian garments. And Joseph, he discerns that although he went through all these trials in his life and all this hardship of being sold and being in prison, through all these trials, he discerns that he went through all of this so he was put in a position of authority to rescue his family. And what a humble soul to do so. And a lot of people could have potentially looked back and thought, you've done this to me, so I'm not going to help you now. It shows his humility, shows his perfection, traits in that way. So then at the end of the Torah portion, we see Jacob and his sons. He has an entourage, doesn't he? And they relocate to Egypt and take refuge in Joseph. Why? Because all authority has been given to Joseph, and there's a famine that strikes the land. This is like apocalypse time that's taken place. And in this time, not only does the family of Jacob take refuge in Joseph's wisdom and his words, so does the entire world, and that entire world is saved from this famine, or the known world, in this story that we're reading about. And last week's parsha, it ends with Jacob, otherwise known as Israel, and his family, and they actually go and receive a land. They receive a land within Egypt called Goshen, and it's a pasture where they can go and dwell on that land as a family, as a unit. So this portion in a nutshell, Vayechi. Jacob lives the final 17 years of his life in Egypt. Before passing, he asks Joseph to take an oath that he will bury him in the promised land. He blesses Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, elevating them to the status of his own sons and as the patriarchs of the two tribes within the nation of Israel. Jacob, the patriarch, desires to reveal the end of days to his children, saying, "Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days." In doing so, Jacob blesses his sons, assigning to each other role as a tribe. Judah, for example, will produce leaders and kings, judges from Dan, and so forth. We then see Reuben is rebuked for confusing his father's marriage bed, and Simeon and Levi for the massacre of Shechem and the plot against Joseph. A large funeral takes place consisting of Jacob's descendants, and Egyptians accompany Jacob on the journey to the Holy Land where Jacob's buried, and he's buried in the cave of Machpelah with his forefathers, which we read in the previous Torah portions: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, all the forefathers. And that was Jacob's request, wasn't it? Before he died, he said, "Bury me in the place of my forefathers." And then lastly, we end the parsha with Joseph passing too. Unfortunately, this is the end of Joseph as well in this parsha, and he passes at the age of 110. And he, like his father, he instructs that his bones be taken out of Egypt and buried in the promised land. But this would come to pass only years later in the narrative of the Exodus, which we will get into next week. And before his passing, Joseph conveys to the children of Israel the testament from which they will draw their hope and faith in the difficult years to come. He says, "Elohim will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So it's quite sad, really. We get the end of two stories. We see Jacob passing and then Joseph later passing. And it's quite short. Torah portion, Vayechi. We see chapters at the end of 47. We see that request that Jacob is requests to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. 48, we see Jacob blessing Ephraim and Manasseh. 49, we see Jacob blessing his sons, and in doing so, this is revealing the fate of the end days. And in the final chapter, we see Jacob's burial and mourning. So this parsha, it is an epic. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of end times prophecy going on in this. It's quite fascinating when you break it down, the different blessings. So we're going to have a little look at some of this end time prophecy today and what was pressed on my heart. So with that, we're going to get straight into the parsha. We're going to read it, and we're going to go from chapter 48.
Now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, "Indeed, your father is sick." And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, "Look, your son Joseph is coming to you." And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a multitude of people, and give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Your offspring, whom you beget after them, shall be yours. They will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, Who are these? Joseph said to his father, They are my sons, whom God has given me in this place. And he said, Please bring them to me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he couldn't see. Then Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I hadn't thought to see your face, but in fact, God has also shown me your offspring. So Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. Then Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, let my name be upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brothers shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, By you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am dying, but God will be with you, and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite, with my sword and my bow.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, quite fascinating. I love that little hat tip there, where it says Jacob's eyes are dim, because it's referring back to how his father his eyes was dim, wasn't it, with Isaac, and all that shenanigan that went on. Yeah, quite interesting. So we see this blessing taking place now, and it's incredible. It really is. We can actually find Yeshua in the picture of this blessing that's taking place. We can find the salvation of our Messiah in the blessing of Manasseh and Ephraim. And when you're reading that, you kind of sort of just maybe read over it, or you can't really picture what it looks like. So I put something on the screen here just to get a little idea. And Manasseh was the eldest, and what would usually happen is that the Manasseh, who's the eldest, would sit on the right-hand side, and Ephraim would sit on the left-hand side. You know, read throughout the scripture, my right hand, you know, usually referring to like Yeshua, and being the eldest, the only born. So it's always the right hand is always signified with the eldest. But curiously here, as we read in the scriptures, then Israel, Jacob, stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So we see something interesting here. Instead of just blessing them as is, he crosses his arms. He crosses his arms over them and blesses the younger. And you could think, wow, that's a bit interesting. What does this symbolise? Well, from reading the scriptures, we know that it's all intentional. He even says to his son, Joseph, I know, my son, I know. Joseph must be thinking, what's going on here? He's a bit old. Is he, you know, is he?
Is his eyes dim?
Yeah, is his eyes dim? Is he a bit dated? But no, he's fully aware of what's taking place. So he switches his arms. He says, I know, my son, I know. Wow, what a powerful statement from Jacob. And from reading this, we know that his actions was intentional. And if we study the Hebrew language, I believe he was actually creating the letter Tav here with his arms, because what's taking place here is two lads who grew up in Egypt are now getting grafted in to the tribe of Israel. So there's a covenant taking place here. There's something much more than just I bless you on your way. You know, this is a ceremony that's taking place. And if we look in the Hebrew, the Tav can mean mark, sign, or covenant. And over the years, the Hebrew letter has changed in form. We can look back at the Paleo-Hebrew or the Phoenician Hebrew, and it's a sign of a cross. And the modern Hebrew, we see it's more shaped like a door. So as Jacob is crossing his arms here, he's actually creating the sign of the Tav, which can mean mark, sign, and covenant. Even though their mum, the lad's mum, Joseph's wife, Asenath, she was an Egyptian, wasn't she? And she was actually the daughter of Potiphar. We read that in the scriptures, and that Potiphar was a priest from the city of On. So we know that this is pagan worship. Tommy covered this a few weeks back, that it means sun. I think On means sun. So priest of the sun. So the born unlike the other sons who was born into a Hebraic family, this wasn't the case, was it? He was born into an Egyptian family. That's taking place here. So there's a ceremony that's taking place, which is revealing the covenant. Even though their mum and Joseph's wife, Asenath, was an Egyptian whose father was Potiphar, the priest of On, this to me is Jacob showing mercy and grafting them into Israel, into the inheritance, despite of their mother's Gentile background. What we've got to remember is that, we see Jacob and Esau, and Isaac's advice to Jacob was what? To go and find someone who was of the same family as someone who was of the same kinsman. They highly valued keeping their relationships woven into the faith. And we read later in the Torah that it's forbidden to go after the Canaanites and other nations. They strictly want to keep their family solid in the faith. So obviously with Joseph living in Egypt all these years, he's been blessed with a wife, but she's been a Gentile wife. So there's a bit of a discrepancy going on here. How's it going to be fixed? But Jacob in his mercy grafts them into Israel, into the inheritance, despite of their mother's Gentile background. And these lads was then prophesied to become great tribes of Israel, not just descendants, because they could have, they still would have been counted something if they didn't receive this blessing. But they went from not only just having an inheritance, but to becoming the tribe, one of the 2 tribes of Israel. And these tribes go on to be, powerful assets to Israel. We see many of the tribes, even the full blood, they fall away. We see the tribe of Dan, don't we, who falls away, and we see other tribes. So even though that these may have a mixture in their bloodline, spiritually, these 2 lads are potent, and that gives me hope. That really, because I've come from a pagan background. I've come from a background where my mum didn't grow up in the faith. My father certainly didn't grow up in the faith. He's an atheist. So it's only through the Tav, the mark, the sign, the covenant, and the cross for us at Calvary, that myself and others born from a Gentile mother, we can receive our inheritance. And our inheritance is of the greater Goshen. In Revelation, we read of the New Jerusalem that's to come, a place where our family will be safe from death and famine, just as how Jacob's family was safe abiding in Joseph, and how our family have the opportunity to be safe by abiding in Yeshua. And as our brother Mark mentioned, Yeshua is only as in second command to Yahweh. All authority is being given to him. And the picture's right there. Pharaoh's in charge of the kingdom, but all authority is being given to Joseph. So the base, the setup, the safe in this time of this apocalypse that's taken place. And we can read that there was a famine in the land, but you can't really comprehend what that would have been like. We just brush past that. Oh, it was a famine in the land, but if it really went to the details, during the peak of all that madness that was going on in 2020.
People were flipping out over bog rolls.
People were flipping out over bog rolls. You go to the supermarket. Fortunately for me, what I like to eat, a bit of fish and that was all there, but all the bog rolls and the pot noodles was gone. So, people was going off at that, and that wasn't even a famine. That was just a bit of a test run, wasn't it? So we could imagine what a true famine's going to be like. It's going to be madness. So there was a great blessing here that was taking place, and the end times is truly written in this story, and we're going to be looking at that a little bit more. So just as Joseph and his family received Goshen, their inheritance, we're going to receive the New Jerusalem, and our family can be safe from the coming destruction of this world. Revelation 22:13, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. To really understand this, we've got to read this in the Aramaic translation. Yeshua himself says, I am the Aleph and the Tav, the first and the last, the origin and the fulfillment. Potent. Yeshua is that Tav. He is that mark, sign and covenant. He actually says it in his text. And if anyone's wondering what the Aleph is, that's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's the ox head. It's the symbol of leader, authority again, coming back to the authority is being granted. And the Tav is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And curiously, in the book of Ezekiel, we see those prophecy given of those who are not to be harmed, to be marked with what? A Tav on their foreheads. And then in Revelation, we also see a mark on their foreheads, which I believe is related to the Tav, which is the mark, the sign, and the covenant. Yeshua, he is the covenant. And in Galatians 3:29, this ties it all up for me. It says, if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So this right here smashed all genealogies out the water and said, if you belong to Christ, if you belong to the Messiah, then you are as good as Abraham's seed and you will inherit the promise. So moving on a little bit now, in just looking back at the narrative, Josh texted me midweek and he was saying that him and Jacob was having a little discussion over this Pharaoh that we see pop up in the Torah portion. And he's quite an interesting figure, this Pharaoh, because, you know, we always have this sort of idea of when we're reading the Bible that Pharaohs are like these big baddies, probably because of the Exodus story. But this Pharaoh, for lack of a better word, he was quite a good Pharaoh. You know, we see in the word that he listens to Joseph's advice when Joseph has that dream, which ultimately we know that advice was from Yah, and Joseph gave the credit to Yah. So ultimately there he did follow God's instruction. We see that he actually gives a plot of land to Jacob's family. And we see in other occasions that he listens to Joseph's advice and trusts a Hebrew who, you know, his roots of where he came from, being a shepherd, is classed as an abomination. So this Pharaoh is quite open, really, and he appears to be good on multiple occasions. And Joseph, he listens to Joseph's requests on multiple occasions. So it's quite a fascinating story. And even so much so that when Jacob turns up, and I mean, you got to imagine this now, once Joseph is revealed that he's a Hebrew and he has his family, his whole entourage come down, Jacob turns up, and if Pharaoh held Joseph in high esteem, how much more is he going to hold Jacob in high esteem when he sees the family, the brothers, the entourage, Joseph laying down? I mean, Jacob's rocking up here and he's saying here, my travels has lasted 130 years. I mean, this is a man of wisdom, you know, that's turning up here. And Pharaoh was wise, and he was wise to recognise this. First, we see Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh. It goes on to say, how many years have you lived? Pharaoh asked. My travels have lasted 130 years, Jacob replied. My years have been few and hard, and they have not matched the years of my travels of my fathers. What happens after that? Then Jacob blesses Pharaoh and departs from his presence. So there's a double blessing that's taken place there. And for me, I just like to look at this, and the gents we've midrashed this over the years, and for me, I see this as Pharaoh being like, this guy's some real deal here, you know, he's a patriarch. You know, after he tells the age, suddenly this blessing takes place. It wouldn't surprise me if Pharaoh asked for this blessing, you know, to take place here. And even the fact that Pharaoh receives this blessing shows an acknowledgement of the God of Abraham and Isaac. So it's quite fascinating, really, the acknowledgement that's taken place here. Joseph built Pharaoh's trust through his commitment to Yah. And this is the point I'm trying to get at here. And Joseph, he wasn't ashamed of the audience. He wasn't ashamed, of his faith, no matter the audience. And I think Pharaoh respected that. And I think Pharaoh, it clearly paid off for Joseph. I'm going to look at that a little bit more in a second, because in Genesis 41, we see that this is confirmed. Pharaoh actually says, can we find anyone like this man in whom the Spirit of God abides? So clearly there was anointing on Joseph. Clearly the Pharaoh recognised how set apart Joseph was. And in addition, later on, the entourage that turned up. Pharaoh could see Joseph's godly nature. And this got me meditating on Joseph's character throughout his journey. And it really revealed to me the potency of the blessing abiding in the third commandment. What's the third commandment? Exodus 20 verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. You see, Joseph actually never took the Lord's name in vain, and that for me was a superpower. What does it mean to take the Lord's name in vain? For me, it means to say that you are a person of God. You say, okay, I believe in God, but in action, do otherwise. That's what it is to truly take the Lord's name in vain. And Joseph was blameless all through his journey. You know, he had his authenticity tested. Remember with Potiphar's wife? Potiphar came to him. He had his authenticity tested there. What did he do? He flees the scene. He doesn't lie with her. So to me, once we have received the covenant, which Joseph has, Joseph knew he was special. He was told he was special from a young age from Jacob. He was given robes, priestly robes, I believe. He understood he had a calling on his life, and he held on to this calling. And he knew that if he was going to represent God, that he was not to take God's character in vain. Once we receive the covenant that's have, it's a serious offence to misrepresent our Father. And it ultimately prevents us from advancing in our calling. And more seriously, it actually affects others around you and can stop them from coming to know the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. It can actually stop them coming to want to know our Father on an intimate level. And I've experienced this recently, with family members, and I won't go into the details, but my family member blesses me for all that Yah has done in my life, but then will point out other people in my immediate circle who may not be quite there yet, and will quickly use that as an accusation to bring down our God. And we've got to be so careful in our day-to-day life, because people are always watching, in work, with our family, and people are waiting for us to stumble, and ultimately all we're doing is misrepresenting our God. And of course we are going to slip and slide, and this is why we're allowed to judge within the body of believers. When Paul and Yeshua are speaking about not to judge, he's speaking about the unsaved who don't know about God, who don't know about the laws and commandments. But when we truly come into covenant, we can hold each other accountable. And I think it's vital, because we don't want this just to be a Shabbat thing, do we? We don't want to be going away midweek, turning up to work with our bosses, with our friends, with our family, and then letting things slide, because ultimately it is only stopping them from coming to know Yah. So despite your audience, whether that is your boss at work, a celebrity you meet, a best friend, a group of friends, your family, strangers, people in positions of authority, the homeless, your integrity to the faith must not be diminished. And representing our God with words that come out of our mouth, that's what we must do. We must not only represent with the words that come out of our mouth, but also not fall into foolishness that comes out of our mouth, with our words and with our actions. And we have to be integral to the covenant that's been given to us. Don't work on the Sabbath. I would feel ashamed now to say that I believe in Yah, to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and work on the Sabbath. And I'm sorry if this offends people online, but this is the reality of the situation. The Christian faith as a whole, or people who believe that we follow Yeshua or the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, it's mocked. It's getting mocked in the West. And the reason being is because we're not standing up for our faith. We can't revert to our old ways around worldly friends. We've got to stand up for our faith. Become blameless to the nations. And this is difficult to do, don't get me wrong, it is, especially if you've come onto this faith like a lot of us have later on in life, when we've still got groups of friends, when we've still got family who knew us before we came into knowing the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. But it's essential. It's essential to our walk. And we see the benefits in its epitome of when Joseph walks out this commandment. He was walking out this third commandment to its fullest, and we see the effectiveness of it, so much so that it saved his entire family. We don't read in scripture that all of those family was God-fearing people. We don't read that. We know that some of the brothers, in fact, was the opposite earlier on in their walk. We don't know the generational of if some of them was a bit lukewarm. But I tell you what, when Uncle Joseph's down in Egypt and he's got all the food and he's got a place to stay, you're going to quickly realise, oh wow, and he's given all the glory to Yah. Oh wow, thank you, Father, thank you for this. So it's something to make a note of. We might not be there yet, we might not be in the position of Joseph, but it took him 17 years, or was it 17? 17, or I've got 17 or 22 in my mind. Time he was away from his father. It took a long time for him to build that. And you might never get there, but the point being is that in the time of tribulation, when things hit the fan, when the trials come, when life and death is on the line, they will run to the Josephs, and you've got to be that blameless person so that they run to you. I tell you now, when your family faces death, God forbid, that happens anytime soon, naturally, obviously, it's something we're all going to face. It's the spiritual ones in the family who are usually who people go to in the family.
And also Joseph blessed God in the trials, because a lot of us have come through the walk and we might feel like we're maybe over that, we don't act like in our family members, but we get tested in times of trial, and the body's watching us, how we react in trial. And when Joseph was in the pit, he still praised God. When he was in prison, he still praised God, like all we do in that, because it can have an effect on the body. Like if I find I have a bit of self-pity, I can see some of the other girls might start, and our actions affect all other people, so we have to check ourselves in that area,
Yeah, definitely. I can't agree with you more, sis. And, I'm not perfect. I slip and slide, and I feel like, I could be better in them areas. And then you're right, I do see it spiritually affect the camp, And this is why we have got to be vigilant and stand up for each other and call out one another on these things, and not be scared to ask them blunt questions, I've obviously just had a lot of time with Emma, who I'm in courtship with. I'm expecting blunt questions to come from Joe, you know what I mean? I welcome them questions from the position that I'm in. And this is how we need to be if we are to be blameless, not to each other, but also the world. And, some of you may have watched the tzitzit teaching lately. That's just another tool to the arsenal to put the tzitzits on, because when you put them on, suddenly think, you're wearing them tassels, you're trying to appear holy. You bet, the quicker to watch in them areas. I remember Tommy telling me once about he was working in a casino, and my brother actually started working there, didn't he? Josh.
Your uncle was already there, didn't know?
Yeah, my uncle was already there, and my brother Josh started working there, and it's just a small world, and this is how it can be, you see. We don't know if people was watching. I think Tommy passed the test, so it's all right. But this is it. You don't know who's going to come into your vicinity, and even, it's selfish in us to act them ways, because we could be meeting these people 10 years down the line, and if we give a false witness, they're not going to hearken to our word. So it's important that we are blameless to the nations, regardless of our audience, whether that's your area manager. I remember when I worked for the mobile phone company, the area manager would come in, and I just used to preach to them about the Sabbath, obviously in due course, you know what I mean. We would discuss, and then he would ask about my faith, and I'd say, Saturday's off and this, but I didn't hold back, because why should I hold back just because he's my area manager? Why should I hold back because it's a homeless person? Why should I hold back because it's a family member? Obviously, you've got to discern the situation, but we shouldn't be putting other people on pedestals. If they don't know the Messiah, then they're doomed. Like, they need to hear about the Messiah, and this obviously will come with time and practice and praying for the courage, like David, to deal with these scenarios. But it's something that we must not waver on at the very least. We should at least stand still and not take a step backward on that. And Ephesians 5:1-7 really summarises this for me. It says, "Be imitators of God, therefore, as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant sacrificial offering to God. But among you, as is proper among the saints, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or crude joking, which are out of character, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person that is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with these empty words, let no one deceive you with empty words, because for such things the wrath of God is coming on the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them." So it really summarises it for me there. Obviously, we can sit with the sinners, but partakers here is sharing in that sin with them in context. Do you want to say something, bro?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
You see, we all work, well, most of us work in situations where we're out in the world.
Yeah.
And there can be like crude language and lewd joking, etc. And it's, you see, if you don't know the law, you judge by the law you made unto yourself. So God's not judging them for it.
Yeah.
It's you. This is the test for you. How are you going to act now? You know, are you going to take his name in vain or not? How are you going to represent your God in front of these people when they're acting in such a way? So it's not a test for them, it's a test for us when we're there. You can see, if you say you know the law, then you must abide by that law, you know, and they were judged by the law they make unto themselves, so they're exempt from that in such a way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd agree with it, most definitely. Yeah.
Can I give a quick example?
Yeah, sure.
So, this is funny, but it represents the world. So I was in an environment where I was the only person who didn't swear. And so much so that some of the teams said, I'll give to charity if you just swear now. I'll give some money to charity.
Oh no.
it was like a debate, you know. What can we do to get Michelle to swear?
Oh, that's just
swear word.
That's vile.
And because I was the only one on the team, it was quite awkward because it was just their common language that they speak, especially the girls as well, which was uncomfortable to be around that. But I thought, I stood out. That's the key. We've got to stand out. Even though we're getting goaded, going, I'll give this money to charity. Just say a swear word now. And it was quite bizarre. But that was the environment. You see, that's the norm. That's the word, like a worldliness about it. And it was very revealing to me that, you know, by not swearing and being set in conduct, I really did stand out.
Oh, praise God, yeah.
So sat upon us, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, you passed the test there, sis. Yeah, Mark?
Just a quick thing to remember. Don't ask a tree what fruit it bears. Wait till the season, it will show you. That's all.
Wow, potent. Yeah, powerful. It's applicable, and Joseph's story is completely applicable to us. He was blameless to Potiphar's wife, and even before that he must have been blameless in a lot of ways for Potiphar to elevate him through the ranks, not only once but then twice again through Pharaoh's ranks. So yeah, fascinating stuff. Be integral with the covenant. You know, let's not work on the Sabbath. You know, let's really take a stand for it here. You know, let's watch our mouth around the workplace. And you may not think, oh, this is affecting in that season, but you know, as Michelle shared, who knows? It may take a couple of seasons, and if tribulation happens, or even just a conversation that might happen, I'm sure you'll be the first person they come and speak to. You know, so praise be to Yah for that. So, just got one last little thing I'd like to reveal now to you all. And this is that the story of Joseph is a picture of the end times. I know that Andy was drawing a few parallels to this last week about the famine of the word and in the famine of bread in this time. And the structure of Joseph's world, it's actually very similar to the world that we live in, right? Think about it. There's taxes that people have to pay, which, funny enough, was actually instituted by Joseph. So anyone who's got a problem with a tax, it's a Hebrew who set it up. Granted, they have changed a couple of times. Like, I don't think that's Torah, the inflation rates. But anyway, so, you know, taxes was in the land. We see that was instituted, and we also see that no matter how successful you were in this land, there was always Pharaoh at the top. And that's a little bit like how today, isn't it? You know, it doesn't matter how famous, how wealthy, how rich, how well known you are in the world, there's always someone at the top. There's always these pharaohs at the top, maybe not even the ones that are in the public eye. You know, we can never obtain that level. Not that we should necessarily, but there's clearly checkpoints in this reality that we're living in. And we know obviously that the whole world is given unto the wicked one. So a couple of parallels. We see that the world we read about in Joseph's time is the whole world comes under Egypt. Essentially, we see in the apocalyptic desperation that everyone comes under the state of Egypt. Everyone starts selling the land to Egypt. And this, to me, is indicative of the end times, of this one world system that we're seeing come together, is that everyone's going to be under this sort of one banner. We see that this forces people to take drastic measures. You know, they would have been selling the family homes, they would have been subdued under this one kingdom. And then in reverse, in the positive light, we see that God's people and the world, not just God's people, was rescued by one man, which we know is striking similarities to Yeshua. And then God's people receive their inheritance. So if we liken this to our day, we see the famine of the word of God, the true bread, being present in our land today. And on a physical level, we're seeing the inflation is at an all-time high. Our gas bills, everything we know is going up. It's just almost coming similar to what we see in the time of Joseph, which then leads to people's moralities being bought and sold, doesn't it? You know, when people are in times of desperation, unfortunately, the moralities go out the window, and this is why we have our faith to have a flat morality no matter our circumstance. Although in the time of tribulation, a lot of people's moralities are sold, we also see a lot of people come to know Yeshua. You know, Josh started researching this a bit more during COVID. I know Andy and Kat started researching this more during these times of tribulation and confusion. So we see that beautiful parallel take place, that this does force people to come to know Yah. And what's quite sad about the story of Joseph and Jacob is that we actually get a happy ending in the Torah portion. They get a nice little plot of land, the family sets up. Although in the book of Exodus, we see that the future Pharaoh forgets Joseph. We'll read it next week, most likely, and it's in verse 8. It says, "Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt." Think about it. You know, you would think this would be in the history books. This man has come from nowhere, interpreted a dream, saved the known world. And then now, a couple of generations later, we're seeing a new king rise up and forgetting Joseph. This country, for me, it used to have Judeo-Christian morals. And as a follower of the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, I am now a minority in the workplace. And as we know, the Judeo-Christian values are being replaced with all kinds of madness. This society is forgetting Joseph. That's what we're seeing taking place here. And when we see Joseph being forgot about, what happens then? We see the shepherds turn into slaves. We see the persecution from the pharaohs. So we're in this interesting transition period right now of where the Judeo-Christian values are slowly transitioning, and we're seeing the inflation, we're seeing Joseph being forgotten about in our land. Because, you know, I know obviously a lot of this came out of Rome and we have the Sunday church worship, but if you go to any local town, there's a church. You know, if you, when my nan grew up, she couldn't get married, couldn't be with someone unless she was married. She couldn't stay in the same home as them. You know, there was them traditional values instilled into society today. And we're seeing the adverse effect. We're seeing depression on the rise. We're seeing a lot of madness taking place in our society. And one must ask, is it because these traditional values, is it because Joseph is being forgotten about? Our kings and leaders have forgotten Joseph. And we're going to see a coronation take place next year. King Charles is going to be coronated as the king. But unfortunately, this come from the Telegraph, and King Charles is going to recognise all faiths at his coronation. This is what has been vowed. In September, this is from the Telegraph, just days after he became the monarch, he vowed to protect the space for faith itself, promising religious leaders during Buckingham Palace reception that he would uphold the numerous religions, cultures, traditions and beliefs to which our hearts and minds direct us. That's quite serious, you know. In the past, we always see, even in this country, people swear in to be a defender of the faith. Yet we are going to see it this time, but if there's a bolt-on being added on here, there's a bolt-on of this multi-faith that's coming to pass. And those with eyes to see can see this king is forgetting Joseph. Yeah. This king is forgetting the Judeo-Christian morals. And who knows, you know, we've got to pray for this guy. This could change. But we are living in a very interesting time, and I can no longer call this country a Christian country anymore. This is transitioning into a multi-faith country. And what's interesting about this coronation, I'm going to share a little something now, and take of this what you will. because for centuries the inauguration of kings and queens have actually been sworn into service by sitting on this mysterious stone. And this stone underneath the throne here, on the right, is known as the Stone of Destiny. It also goes with a couple of names, the Stone of Scone and Jacob's Stone. So funny enough, it's an ancient symbol. And this symbol, or the sacred object, should I say, some actually believe that this is Jacob's pillow. And this is actually the rock where Jacob rested his head upon and had the famous dream known as Jacob's ladder. Now take of this what you will. I'm not saying it is 100%, we don't read about this in the word, but being on subject with the parsha of Jacob and Jacob's pillow, there's some interesting history that goes with this. And we're seeing now that the king, the Pharaoh in the parsha, he is blessed by Jacob. So what can this tell us of the times that we're in today? Well, the story of this stone goes that when Jeremiah fled the Babylonian invasion, he travelled down to Egypt, and then he took a ship to Ireland with an entourage, and with him he took some of the artefacts that was treasured to his people. And one of these artefacts was apparently this stone that Jacob laid his head upon. And there's local tales in Ireland that Jeremiah set up a church, and this stone was used to inaugurate the leaders. And admittedly, the history is very vague on this. A lot of it is folklore and wives' tales, but you've got to remember, a lot of people couldn't read or write back then. Stories were passed down through the word of mouth, through these different tales. So with that, Jeremiah went to Ireland, and people have done some digging of different churches dedicated to Saint Jeremiah. And we know that the Irish background are very strong in faith. They've got a strong resilience when it comes to the word of God. Granted, a lot of it may be religious and inherited religion, but there is a strong faith there for the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So with that, when the stone landed in Ireland a couple of years later, apparently the stone was moved to Scotland. Some say that this was on loan for an inauguration that was taking place over there. But history begins to come clear in 1296 when King Edward I of England, he seized the stone from the Scots. So he was at war with the Scots. If you ever watched Braveheart, it was during this time period. The big bad guy, the king on Braveheart, that's King Edward I. And when he was at war with the Scots, he actually took it as one of the spoils of war. And he had it built into a new throne at Westminster, and from then on it was used in the coronation ceremonies of the monarchs of England in Great Britain. So really fascinating. You've got to think about it. Why would these monarchs with all this wealth have so much interest in this stone? And moving on in the story, on Christmas Day in the 1950s, funny enough, this stone was actually removed from Westminster Abbey. It was from a Scottish nationalist party. Some diehard Scots felt like it had been stolen from their homeland, so they went on Christmas Day and they stole this stone from Westminster Abbey, and they drove it all the way up to Scotland. And this was a big thing in the news at the time. The police were shutting down roads, they was creating borders, traffic points to try and reclaim this stone. Anyway, 3 months later, it turns up 500 miles away. It's at the place called Arbroath Abbey. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly. Maybe Anna might correct me with Arbroath. Arbroath Abbey. So it turns up there, but unfortunately what happened was when they took the stone, they actually dropped it on the way out, and it split in two. So these two pieces went up north, and they went into hiding. The Scottish Nationalist Party, they must have been buzzing. We've reclaimed the stone back from the English. A bit mad. But anyway, so the English went on a hunt for this stone, and it turned up 3 months later, and you can see here the police force retrieving the stone. It was recovered by the police, and then 3 years later, the stone was actually recovered in time for the Queen's inauguration in 1953. And what's interesting is on the screen, you can see it's been returned back to underneath the seat. And some believe that the stone that was returned wasn't actually the correct stone. Because what had to happen was they had to put iron bars through these two stones to seal them together. Now, whoever weighed it said at the time that it didn't weigh the original weight of the stone that was stolen, but they just had to make do. So there's different theories and tales that this stone could potentially be out there. But the reason why for me it's interesting is because in next year they're actually going to bring it all the way down from Edinburgh Castle, where it's actually currently residing. So in Edinburgh, you can go on a tour in the castle, and you've got it there, and it's in a little box, and you can go and view it, and it's next to the crown jewels. And England actually, once they recovered it, they didn't persecute the Scots who stole it, which makes you think, did they break any laws? Was it rightfully theirs in the first place? Because no one got persecuted. But then what was interesting was that when it was Queen Elizabeth actually returned it back in 1996, and today it's one of the priceless treasures on display in the Crown Room, and it's visited by millions of people each year, and it's going to leave Scotland again in 2023 for the coronation in Westminster Abbey. So one must ask whether this is Jacob's pillow or not. You know, like the Pharaoh, we read that they were seeking some form of a supernatural ability. You know, why would an insanely wealthy monarchy create so much hassle over an ancient stone? You know, think about this. They closed down roads. They went on a manhunt after this. And this stone is displayed alongside some of the most expensive piece of kit you can find. You know, the crown jewels. You know, this is some precious stones. This can't be more than just a bit of rock. And for me, it was a valuable item that was won and taken as the spoils of war. So I don't know if this is Jacob's stone or not. But I thought it was an interesting bit of folklore, you could say, that's involved around this stone, and that it is still in service to this day. And in March, we're going to see it travel down again from Edinburgh.
Whether we believe it is or not, they believe it is.
Yeah. Whether we believe it, it is or not.
It's their authority from God, isn't it? That's how they take it.
Yeah, I think that's the thought pattern. You know, I would never know. I doubt they'd ever tell us, but we can only assume that they're seeing this as something more than just a stone. It's a stone that they're using to inaugurate the kings and queens. And what's fascinating is that obviously that stone was split, and from Queen Elizabeth II onwards, a lot of people say that, you know, this is a sign now for the end times, because a fake queen and whatnot. So who knows? I thought it was interesting to include, because we're seeing Jacob's story come to a conclusion, and they want to receive the blessings of Jacob but reject the works of Jacob. And this was the same as it was today. It's the same as it is today as it was back then. You know, we see the Pharaoh blessed twice by Jacob. We're seeing today these old instruments being used, these relics of antiquity being carried up in a little in a little car with a windshield all the way from Edinburgh Castle. You know, I mean, there's got to be something behind this, you know. But just as the pharaohs back then were wanting to receive the blessings, the pharaohs of today, they want to receive the blessings, but they do not want to walk in Jacob's actions. As we read earlier, King Charles, we see that he's to recognise all faiths at the coronation. This is Babylonian, this is Egyptian to me. You know, we've got to pray that this guy will recognise the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob as the only faith. And on the theme of looking at the third commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. This is what our country is now fallen into, and it's dangerous times, because we've shifted from having a Christian country over into, I believe, is taking the Lord's name in vain, because they're claiming to be a defender of the faith, but yet then their actions are proven otherwise. They want the blessings of Jacob, but they don't want to do the works of Jacob. They don't want to reside in Goshen. Hebrews 10:25, and we're coming to a close now. Let us not neglect meeting together, as some have made a habit, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. What day is that? That's the day of the coming of the Lord, you know, the return of the Son of Man. Jacob, he relocated his family to be under Joseph's protection. We as individuals, we change our life to be under Yeshua's protection. Jacob was given Goshen, a place where a community of the Israelites could be built. And in this time, in this Egypt, what we're living in, you know, if you can't see that this is Egypt, what I've just explained here, we've got kings that are saying multi-faith. We need to find our Goshen. We need to seek out for that safe land that we can reside in. And I urge anyone now who is watching online or maybe see this at a later date to find your local Goshen. It's too hard to be out there on your own. It really is. I mean, if I wasn't here without the gents and without the fellowship, I'd be still in the pit. I wouldn't have made it out the pit. It's time to seek Goshen. You know, things are ramping up in the West now. We're going to have to rely on community living. And beautifully, a lot of believers have recognised this. You know, we have the two Ellies, Anna, you know, we have Marlene, we have many people who have moved up to this fellowship. Alex, Minu, Darren, it goes on, and they've recognised that Pharaoh is up in his Pharaoh's forgetting Joseph here, and I need to reside in Goshen for as long as I can until we can no longer be shepherds and we've got to bail. Goshen head. So, and
Online, we live in Birkenhead.
For them online, we live in Birkenhead, otherwise referred to as Goshen head. So yeah, it's serious, folks. You know, YouTube ministry. If you're tuning into YouTube every single week and think that's going to fill your cup, it's going to hit you like a train. This is me telling you now. You need to seek out a local fellowship, and if you can't find a fellowship that agrees on everything, good. You know, I don't think the brothers all agreed on it. We've just learned that for the past few weeks, haven't we? The brothers of Israel didn't agree on quite a few things. So find a fellowship which you most agree with. Make it your community, invest into your community, and create that land of Goshen. And of course, we can have a season out of fellowship. We can have a season out. But if you'd have a few seasons out, the well gonna run dry. And so you gotta keep in season. Not only to survive the famine of the world, which is coming, we're gonna have to rely on people in a community sense, but more importantly, the famine of the word. That's what's more important. And in our own strength, we can't do it. And think about it, you know, how are you going to bring up your kids? How are you going to bring up your little ones, your next generation, if you're not surrounding them in Goshen? You know, Jacob was wise, wasn't he? Joseph was wise. Joseph thought, right, I'm going to, all of you say that you're shepherds and go and, you know, you'll get that little land that's out the way there. You know, you've got to be wise about this. So I think I've answered the question a million times over, but let's see, first one to the buzzer. What was the occupation of those who were to live in Goshen? What was their occupation? They were shepherds. They were shepherds and shepherdesses. As we're living in this Goshen now, mini Goshen, Goshenhead, it's our duty and it's our occupation to be shepherd and shepherdesses. We must be blameless while residing in Goshen. That Yah has actually made this community. It's not been through any of us. And why? So we can be the light to those who are seeking the good shepherd. So those who want this, they know where to find us. And I was close. I think I got it right. Joseph was 22 years without his Goshen, 22 years without his land, without his father, without his tribe. And he longed for that. He longed for that reunion with his family. So let's not delay it. Wherever you are, where you're up to online, if you're watching and you're living down south, or consider moving to a local fellowship. Consider moving more than just a local fellowship. because these times, as we read about in Revelation, they're not going to get easier. And I'm not here to say that the end is nigh and to put everyone down, but that's the reality of the matter. We've got the Aleph and the Tav. We've got the Tav, which is at the end. And if you're part of the Tav, if you're part of the covenant, we need to reside in him. How can I help feed his sheep? We read in the gospel accounts, Yeshua said to Simon, feed my sheep. How can we be feeding his sheep then? If we're all shepherds and shepherdesses, how can we feed his sheep? It doesn't have to come in a form of a teaching. It doesn't have to come in the form of Sonia's trifle. Torah Masu.
Feed the sheep, like.
It can come in many ways. It can come in a text. It can come in showing your face at Andy and Kat's prayer group. It can come in taking the effort out of your week to show up to Becca's Shebrews group, so that you can receive and she can receive. It's mutual. It's a like we always say in this room, receiver transmitters. We need to be there for one another, and there's many ways that we can feed each other. We can help out around the Shabbat. We can visit people during the week. We can feed the sheep by going out and preaching the gospel. That's another way. There's many ways to feed the sheep. The list is endless. And if you think, I'm a bit old, I can't quite do this, I can't quite do that, it's past me years now, or no, I'm not quite well. How old was Jacob when he rocked up in his Egypt? Jacob was no spring chicken when he rocked up, So consider that, Jacob, what could he do? He could bless others, couldn't he? That's what Jacob could do. He could bless those around him. He blessed the Gentiles and he blessed those who was in his family. So, to conclude, let's recognise the potency of the covenant and your inheritance. If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And if we recognise the covenant and the potency of that covenant, then let's not go forth and take the Lord's name in vain. When we say we are followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, let's fulfil what we are saying we actually are. And with that, lastly, let us seek to congregate together as commanded, to gather on the Sabbath as a sacred assembly. People want to observe the Sabbath, but they forget that part. It's a sacred assembly. And as the book of Hebrews says, let's not forsake fellowship in the day that's approaching. With that, we'll end the Torah portion. Vayechi. Thank you for watching, everyone. Until next time, from our house to your house, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.